Feeling the pinch of those ever-increasing energy bills? You're not alone. Last winter, my heating bill and I had a staring contest, hoping those digits would magically shrink. But here's a thought that might just blow your mind. Our ancestors from the Middle Ages actually possessed some truly ingenious heating solutions that we've completely overlooked. While we're here grumbling about chilly drafts and fiddling with our smart thermostats, medieval people were absolute masters at staying toasty warm without burning through a single kilowatt of electricity. And no, they weren't just shivering in the cold. They had some remarkably clever tricks tucked up their woolen sleeves. What's truly ironic is how rapidly these heating techniques vanished, quicker than your dad's hairline in his 40s. Most of them were simply forgotten when the Industrial Revolution came roaring in, brandishing its gleaming new technologies. Everyone got so swept up in the excitement of modern heating that these old-fashioned methods were casually discarded, like day-old bread crusts. Yet astonishingly, recent archaeological discoveries reveal that some medieval homes maintained cozy temperatures, reaching up to 70 degrees Fahrenheit throughout the winter, relying solely on these overlooked techniques. Pretty impressive for folks who, thought the world might be flat, right? Speaking of remarkable heating solutions, let's delve into one of their most impressive inventions, the medieval hearth. This wasn't just your run-of-the-mill fireplace, it was the very core of the home, its literal beating heart. Unlike our contemporary fireplaces, often relegated to corners like shy wallflowers at a dance, medieval hearths stood proudly at the center of the main living space. And let me tell you, they really knew what they were doing with this design. Here's what made these hearths truly brilliant. They worked in harmony with the entire house to create a natural integrated heating system. The stones surrounding and underneath the hearth were designed to absorb heat throughout the day, acting like a massive natural heat bank. Then, much like that house guest who lingers way too long after the party's over, these stones would continue to radiate warmth long after the flames had died down. In some medieval structures, these heat-retaining stones could keep emitting warmth for up to a staggering 12 hours after the fire was extinguished. Even the smoke played a crucial role in their ingenious plan. Instead of being whisked straight up a chimney, which many homes didn't even possess, it would gradually filter out through gaps in the roof. Now, before you turn up your nose, this smoke served as an organic pest control system, deterring bugs from infesting the timbers and helping to preserve food hanging from the rafters. Talk about a win-win situation, although in today's terms we might say 2 wins for the price of 1, to be a bit more succinct. Recent investigations of surviving medieval dwellings have demonstrated that these central hearths could effectively warm spaces up to 600 square feet, roughly the size of a modern apartment. And get this, the stone floors surrounding these hearths bear scorch marks, evidence of being consistently heated to temperatures exceeding 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Makes my attempts to reheat leftover pizza seem rather amateurish by comparison. But what about those times when even the mighty hearth wasn't quite sufficient? That's when medieval people really got inventive, devising resourceful community-based solutions. Speaking of which, prepare to be amazed by their ingenious communal fires. Because while we might grumble about our neighbors today, medieval folks genuinely depended on theirs, especially during the frigid winters. The whole "it takes a village" concept wasn't just a folksy saying back then, it was their actual heating strategy. Every village had these incredible communal fire areas where people would gather to ward off the cold. And honestly, these spaces sound far more appealing than my neighborhood's tedious HOA meetings. These communal fires were typically established in the village square or within a designated building known as a warming house. But don't imagine a mere basic fire pit. These places were the medieval equivalent of our modern coffee shops, community centers, and social media hubs all rolled into one. People would bring their work along, exchange news, essentially medieval Facebook updates, and even cook together. Historical records reveal that some villages maintained these fires continuously 24/7 throughout the winter months, with families rotating shifts to keep them burning. Here's another fascinating detail. Archaeologists have discovered that these communal warming houses were strategically positioned so that smoke would naturally drift away from the village's primary residential areas. These medieval engineers were serious about their craft. They even calculated that a typical village warming house could comfortably accommodate up to 50 individuals at once. far more efficient than running 50 individual home fires. Talk about medieval energy efficiency. The best part was the genuine sense of community these places fostered. People shared stories, arranged marriages, and even held minor court sessions there. One historian unearthed a record from 1267 documenting how a village resolved a property dispute over a chicken while warming their toes by the communal fire. Now that's what I call resourceful problem solving, though perhaps I shouldn't complete that saying given the chicken context. But sometimes venturing to the communal fire wasn't feasible, or perhaps you simply weren't in the mood to listen to Mrs. Johnson from 2 doors down drone on about her prize-winning turnips yet again. That's when personal heating solutions became indispensable, like these clever little hand warmers and pocket stones, because personal heating in medieval times was akin to carrying around your own miniature furnace, only much more stylish. These people invented portable heating long before portable anything was even conceived. Instead of the disposable chemical hand warmers we use today for camping, medieval individuals carried heated stones in metal containers filled with smoldering coals. They were essentially walking around with their own personal hearth fragments. The most prevalent type of hand warmer was called a chaufferette, a fancy French term for what was essentially a perforated metal sphere. You'd fill these contraptions with hot coals and carry them in your pockets or muffs. Affluent individuals possessed elaborate versions crafted from silver or gold, while ordinary folk utilized iron or copper. One medieval merchant's inventory from 1378 listed over 30 distinct varieties of hand warmers. Talk about product diversity. Pocket stones were even more intriguing. They would heat smooth river stones by the fire until they were thoroughly warmed, then wrap them in scraps of cloth. Archaeological excavations have unearthed thousands of these stones, bearing telltale wear patterns from constant handling and reheating. Some even exhibited slight grooves worn into them from being carried in the same pocket day after day. Makes my phone's wear patterns look rather mundane in comparison. But here's where their ingenuity truly shines. They didn't just use these for warming their hands. People would place heated stones in their boots, tuck them into their clothing, or even use them to pre-warm their beds before sleep. There's a rather amusing court record from 1422 detailing a man who faced legal trouble for accidentally taking someone else's heated stone at a church service. Apparently, heated stone theft was a genuine offense back then. The prescribed punishment? He had to provide heated stones for the entire congregation for the remainder of the winter. Some medieval physicians even prescribed specific types of stones for different ailments. Stomachache? Here's a flat stone. Sore back? Try this curved one. It was essentially the medieval equivalent of a heating pad prescription. The amusing part is, modern science confirms they weren't entirely off base. Heat therapy genuinely does alleviate certain types of pain. And when personal heating wasn't quite sufficient, medieval people turned to an even more unconventional source of warmth, their furry companions. But I'm not talking about your typical cats and dogs here. The medieval home heating solution involved considerably larger animals. In fact, you might wonder why medieval barns were frequently attached to houses. It wasn't simply because farmers were too lazy to venture outside. They were actually utilizing their livestock as living, breathing furnaces. A single cow generates as much heat as a small space heater, approximately 1,000 BTUs per hour. Now multiply that by 5 or 6 cows, add in a couple of sheep, and you've got yourself a serious heating apparatus. Medieval farmers constructed their homes with a clever layout. The living quarters would share a wall with the animal barn, typically on the north side to shield against those biting winter winds. The animal's body heat would permeate through the walls, creating a natural warming effect. It was akin to having a collection of space heaters that also produced milk and wool. Studies of surviving medieval farmhouses reveal that rooms sharing walls with animal pens consistently remained about 10 degrees warmer than other rooms. The best part? These animals were essentially self-sustaining heaters. Just provide them with some hay, and they'd continue pumping out warmth all night long. Granted, the aroma wasn't ideal. Medieval air fresheners weren't exactly a thing, but I suppose when you're facing freezing temperatures, a little farm fragrance is preferable to turning into a human icicle. One medieval text from 1382 even provides specific recommendations about which animals make the most effective heaters. Cows were top tier, followed by horses, while chickens, well, let's just say they were the medieval equivalent of those tiny USB heaters that barely make a difference. There's even a record of a landlord in 1415 who offered reduced rent for houses that didn't share a wall with the barn. Medieval real estate's first heating included discount. But what about those who couldn't tolerate the barnyard aromatherapy? Well, they became incredibly inventive with their next heating solution, employing some remarkably astute science. Even if they didn't recognize it as such, they discovered how to make firework doubly hard using reflectors. The science behind it is genuinely impressive. Tests conducted on recreated medieval reflectors demonstrated they could elevate a room's temperature by up to 30%. That's essentially gaining a third more heat from the same quantity of firewood. And these individuals figured this out centuries before anyone fully comprehended how heat radiation functioned. My high school physics teacher would have been thoroughly impressed. Here's a fun fact. One medieval castle in France boasted silver-plated walls in its great hall. The lord who commissioned them wasn't merely flaunting his wealth. He was actually constructing a massive heat reflector system, though I imagine explaining that to the tax collector was interesting. No, really, the silver walls are for heating, not just to make my neighbors envious. The ingenious aspect was their discovery that curved reflectors outperform flat ones. Some particularly clever medieval engineers even designed corner fireplaces with curved metal backings that could effectively distribute heat across an entire room. It's as if they invented medieval surround sound. But for heat, these curved reflectors were so efficient that some medieval documents reveal people actually complaining about rooms being too hot. Now that's a winter problem we'd all love to have. Records from a monastery in 1388 mention a particularly ingenious setup where they employed a series of angled reflectors to direct heat into the monastery's infirmary, creating what we now term targeted heating zones. The monks referred to it as God's mirrors, though I suspect God was more impressed with their prayers than their heating system. But what about those frigid winter nights when even the most sophisticated reflectors couldn't quite suffice? That's when medieval people deployed their secret weapon for a cozy night's sleep. The bed warmer, aka the medieval electric blanket, it was pure genius in its simplicity. A long-handled copper or brass pan filled with hot coals would be slid between the sheets like a giant, warm sandwich filling. These warming pans weren't merely functional. They were often exquisitely decorated with patterns and designs, making them the medieval equivalent of those fancy kitchen gadgets we all covet today. Each pan could hold enough hot coals to keep a bed comfortably warm for approximately 2 to 3 hours, typically ample time to drift into a peaceful slumber. Wealthy individuals would have servants warm their beds, while common folk would undertake the coal-shuffling duties themselves. Fun fact, archaeologists unearthed one pan from 1435 inscribed with "Sweet dreams, don't let the ice bite" on its handle. Seems medieval people possessed a sense of humor about their chilly nights. But here's where it gets truly fascinating. They had a whole system meticulously planned out. The coals would be carefully selected from the evening fire, with the best embers reserved for bed warming. Why? Because no one desired to awaken to smoky sheets or, worse, a bed fire. Records indicate that some towns even employed specialized bed warmer inspectors, whose job it was to ensure people weren't utilizing hazardous coals. Talk about a unique job title to add to your medieval LinkedIn profile. A single warming pan could elevate bed temperatures by about 20 to 25 degrees Fahrenheit, enough to transform a frigid bed into a snug nest. Some particularly resourceful individuals even developed a rotation system, utilizing multiple pans throughout the night. One historical document recounts a particularly harsh winter in 1442, when a nobleman employed 6 different warming pans to maintain a consistent temperature in his enormous bed. Now that's what I call high-maintenance sleeping. But for those who couldn't afford elaborate warming pans or were apprehensive about potentially setting their beds ablaze, there was another solution that effectively trapped warmth while they slept: the canopy bed. And trust me, it wasn't merely about ostentation. Because canopy beds weren't just medieval interior designers showing off, they were actually ingenious heat traps. The heavy curtains surrounding these beds functioned like a personal sleeping bag, preventing your body heat from dissipating into the cold room. Records indicate these beds could maintain temperatures up to 15 degrees warmer than the surrounding room, making them the original sleep pods. Medieval carpenters became experts at designing these beds for maximum warmth. The amusing aspect is that people began to compete over who possessed the most elaborate bed curtains. One record from 1389 mentions a merchant who allocated more funds to his bed curtains than to his entire house. Now that's what I call mixed-up priorities. But at least he was warm. Scientists tested a recreated medieval canopy bed and discovered that, with all curtains drawn, it required only about 10 minutes for body heat to establish a cozy microclimate within. But what about staying warm during daylight hours? Well, medieval builders had another trick up their sleeves. They harnessed something we still utilize today, the power of the sun, and they were considerably more adept at leveraging it than many contemporary architects. Because these medieval builders were essentially solar power pioneers, albeit without the sophisticated panels, they realized that by constructing a house with large, south-facing windows, you could effectively trap the sun's heat. These weren't just randomly placed windows either. They were strategically positioned to capture the low winter sun while remaining shaded during the summer months. It's as if they invented seasonal temperature control long before air conditioning was even a distant dream. The true ingenuity lay in how they employed stone walls. They would construct these thick walls that would absorb heat throughout the day and gradually release it at night, functioning like a stone heat reservoir. Tests conducted on surviving medieval buildings have demonstrated that these walls could store sufficient heat to keep rooms warm for up to 8 hours after sunset. Some castles even featured dedicated sunrooms with walls reaching up to 6 feet in thickness. Now that's what I call extreme insulation. You know those modern passive solar homes everyone's raving about? Turns out medieval builders beat them to the punch by approximately 800 years. Archaeological studies have revealed that some medieval houses were angled precisely 17.5 degrees east of true south, the optimal orientation for maximizing sun exposure during winter. And here I am, still struggling to determine which direction is north using my phone's compass. One particularly astute lord in 1356 had his great hall constructed with varying window sizes on each floor. The lower windows were smaller to minimize heat loss, while the upper ones were expansive sun catchers. His servants probably thought he was eccentric, but energy bills weren't exactly a concern back then, were they? But sometimes even the most ingenious sun-capturing strategies weren't enough to completely banish the cold. That's when medieval builders would look upwards, way upwards, to their next heating solution. Those seemingly simple thatched roofs weren't just a medieval aesthetic choice. They were actually remarkable natural insulators. Packed straw creates countless minuscule air pockets that trap heat, functioning precisely like modern home insulation. But unlike that pink fiberglass stuff in our attics today, these roofs were entirely natural and endured for decades. A well-constructed thatched roof could be up to 2 feet thick, and tests indicate they were superior at retaining heat compared to many contemporary roofing materials. The truly remarkable aspect, these roofs actually breathed. They allowed just enough moisture to escape, preventing mold growth, while simultaneously retaining all the warm air inside. A properly thatched roof could diminish heat loss by up to 50% compared to other medieval roofing alternatives. One medieval record from 1397 recounts a particularly snowy winter where thatched houses remained so warm that the inhabitants had to open their windows in January, while their tile-roofed neighbors were likely huddled around their fires, bewildered by the apparent medieval magic happening next door. But the ultimate invention for staying warm during those protracted winter nights? Well, that stemmed from some seriously creative thinking about the ideal placement for hot rocks. These medieval heating engineers had one final trick up their sleeves, and it involved transforming the floor into a giant heating pad. Because here's the thing about truly massive stones. They retain heat like teenagers cling to their smartphones. Medieval people discovered that if you heated large stones in a fire and then tucked them beneath the floorboards, they'd radiate warmth for hours. It was like having heated floors before heated floors were even considered trendy. A typical setup would utilize stones weighing between 20 to 30 pounds each. They'd heat these substantial stones throughout the day, then slide them into designated slots beneath the wooden floors or benches. Tests on comparable stones have shown they could retain warmth for up to 6 hours. And get this, some medieval houses even featured dedicated stone warming pits built directly into their kitchens, like a prehistoric microwave, but specifically for rocks. The truly opulent residences even had stone warming schedules. Documents from one 15th century manor house detail a rotation of 24 stones throughout the day, with servants exchanging them every 4 hours. Talk about a hot job. Scientists estimate this system could maintain room temperatures around 65 degrees Fahrenheit, 18 degrees Celsius, even when it was freezing outside. One monk wrote in 1403 about how they employed this technique in the monastery's infirmary, referring to it as God's own heating, though I'm fairly certain God would have simply invented central heating if he were directly involved in medieval architecture. And there you have it, 10 ingenious medieval heating methods that put our modern solutions somewhat to shame. Makes you wonder what other brilliant ideas we've let slip through the cracks over the centuries, doesn't it? Perhaps it's time we resurrected some of these. Minus the barnyard smells, of course.